144 hours. That is the exact amount of time remaining before the most fragile ceasefire in the history of the modern Middle East expires, potentially plunging the global economy into a depression that experts warn could last for a decade. On April 22, 2026, the temporary truce between the United States and the Islamic Republic of Iran is scheduled to end, and as of this moment, there is no signed agreement to prevent the resumption of a war that has already claimed the life of Iran's supreme leader and sent oil prices screaming past $100 a barrel. The world is holding its breath as the clock ticks toward midnight on Wednesday. For the last 6 weeks, we have witnessed a conflict of unprecedented scale, beginning with the decapitation strike on February 28th that eliminated Ali Khamenei and much of the Iranian military command. Since then, the conflict has shifted from high-intensity kinetic warfare to a grueling naval blockade and a series of desperate diplomatic gambits. The failure of the Islamabad talks just days ago left the international community in a state of shock, but a late-night declaration from the White House has suddenly changed the calculus. To understand how we reached this precipice, we must look at the events of April 10th, when Vice President J.D. Vance walked out of a high-security compound in Islamabad after 21 hours of grueling face-to-face negotiations. It was the first time American and Iranian officials had sat in the same room since 2015, and the expectations were massive. When Vance boarded Air Force Two without a signed deal, the global markets reacted instantly, with Asian stocks sliding and the US dollar surging as investors prepared for the worst-case scenario. The stakes are not just regional, they are existential for the global supply chain. During the ceasefire, the United States has maintained a total naval blockade of Iranian ports, essentially strangling the Iranian economy while the diplomats talk. This blockade, enforced by the USS Tripoli and a carrier strike group positioned in the Gulf of Oman, has effectively halted all Iranian oil exports and restricted the flow of essential goods. Iran has countered by threatening to use its remaining anti-ship missile batteries to close the Strait of Hormuz entirely, a move that would trap 20% of the world's oil supply. The core of the disagreement remains the Iranian nuclear program, which the United States now demands be completely dismantled as a condition for peace. Specifically, the U.S. delegation in Islamabad presented a 15-point plan that requires the permanent closure of the Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan facilities. These sites are not merely laboratories. They are deeply buried, hardened complexes that have survived years of sabotage and cyber attacks. The American demand is clear. Every gram of highly enriched uranium currently in Iran's possession must be handed over to international custody, specifically under American supervision. Iran has responded with its own 10-point counterproposal, insisting on the immediate lifting of the naval blockade and the release of $6 billion in frozen assets before a single centrifuge is decommissioned. The Iranian negotiators, led by Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Khalibaf, argue that enrichment for civilian purposes is an inalienable right of the Iranian people. They have signaled that while they are willing to discuss limits, the total surrender of their nuclear infrastructure is a non-starter, even with American warships looming off there. The geography of the conflict adds a layer of complexity that makes a quick resolution nearly impossible. The Fordow enrichment plant is built deep into a mountain near the city of Qom, shielded by hundreds of feet of rock and sophisticated air defense systems. American military planners have made it clear that if negotiations fail on April 22nd, Fordow will be the primary target of a renewed bombing campaign. This is not a veiled threat. The Department of Defense has already moved specialized bunker-buster munitions to regional bases in Qatar and the United Arab Emirates in preparation for the expiration of the ceasefire. Meanwhile, the situation on the ground in Iran is one of mounting desperation. The naval blockade has caused the Iranian rial to lose nearly half of its value in 6 weeks, leading to a shortage of imported medicines and industrial parts. Despite the ceasefire, the blockade prevents any tanker from leaving the Iranian terminals at Karg Island. This economic strangulation is designed to force the Iranian leadership to the table, but it also risks empowering the most radical elements of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps who believe that a total war is the only way to break the American grip. The internal politics of the United States are equally volatile. President Trump has been vocal about his desire for a deal, but he has also maintained a rhetoric of total victory. On April 16th, just yesterday, the president declared from the Oval Office that a deal is very possible and that the Iranians are desperate to talk. This shift in tone from the aggressive rhetoric of the previous weeks suggests that back-channel communications through Pakistan have been more productive than the public failure in Islamabad would suggest. However, the American public is divided. Some see the blockade as a necessary tool to prevent a nuclear-armed Iran, while others fear that the April 22 deadline is a self-imposed trap that will force the U.S. into a ground war it cannot afford. The Pentagon has been transparent about its readiness, stating that tens of thousands of troops are currently stationed in the region, ready for combat operations the moment the ceasefire expires. This level of mobilization has not been seen since the 2003 invasion of Iraq, and the logistical footprint is massive. The role of Pakistan in these negotiations cannot be overstated. As the host of the talks and a neighbor to Iran, Islamabad has a direct interest in preventing a full-scale regional war. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has spent the last 48 hours in a whirlwind of shuttle diplomacy, traveling between Riyadh, Doha, and Ankara. His goal is to build a regional consensus that can pressure both Washington and Tehran into a compromise. The Pakistani Chief of Defense Forces, Asim Munir, has also been in Tehran, meeting with the Iranian interim leadership to discuss technical guarantees for the nuclear program. Saudi Arabia and Qatar are also playing a delicate game. While they view Iran's regional influence as a threat, they are terrified of the economic fallout from a closed Strait of Hormuz. Saudi officials have quietly been urging the U.S. to accept a phased enrichment freeze rather than demanding total dismantlement, fearing that Iran's retaliation would target Saudi desalination plants and oil refineries. The memory of the 2019 Abqaiq Qurayz attack looms large, and the Saudi leadership knows that American air defenses are not a perfect shield against Iran's massive drone and missile inventory. One of the most significant sticking points is the fate of Iran's stockpile of uranium, enriched to 60%. This material is just a short technical step away from weapons grade. The U.S. insists that this stockpile be physically removed from Iranian soil and transported to a third country for downblending. Iran views this as a violation of its sovereignty and a strategic vulnerability. They have proposed a system of enhanced inspections by the International Atomic Energy Agency instead, but given the history of the last decade, the U.S. administration has stated that inspections alone are no longer sufficient. The naval blockade itself has become a point of contention, even within the U.S. Navy. While the blockade is effective at stopping large tankers, the sheer volume of small dhows and smuggling vessels in the Persian Gulf makes a total seal impossible. There are reports of frequent close-quarters encounters between U.S. destroyers and Iranian fast attack craft. These incidents carry a high risk of accidental escalation, where a single nervous sailor on either side could trigger the very war the ceasefire is supposed to prevent. As we move closer to the deadline, the volatility in the global markets is reaching a breaking point. Every rumor of a breakthrough or a breakdown sends oil prices swinging by $5 to $10 in a single trading session. For the average consumer, this has translated into a dramatic rise in gasoline and heating oil prices, putting immense pressure on the U.S. economy during an election cycle. The Biden-era Strategic Petroleum Reserve releases have already been exhausted, leaving the current administration with few tools to manage a sustained price spike. Before I tell you about the secret internal struggle within the Iranian government that might actually be the key to this entire deal, if this story is surprising you, drop a comment below. I want to know your reaction. Do you think a deal is actually possible in 6 days, or are we witnessing the calm before the storm? And if you are not subscribed yet, Now is the time, because stories like this one change by the hour, and you need to be informed when the next development breaks. To understand the Iranian position, we have to look inside the power vacuum left by the death of Ali Khamenei. For the first time since 1989, Iran is being governed by a committee rather than a single supreme authority. This interim leadership council, established under Article 111 of the Iranian Constitution, consists of three very different men: President Masoud Pezeshkian, Chief Justice Gholam Hossein Mohseni Ejei, and Alireza Arafi. This triumvirate is deeply fractured, with Pezeshkian representing the pragmatists who want to end the war, and Ejei representing the hardline judiciary and security establishment. Pezeshkian, who was elected on a platform of limited reform, is acutely aware that the Iranian public is exhausted. The protests that followed the February strike were suppressed, but the underlying resentment remains. He knows that if he can deliver an end to the blockade and the return of the $6 billion, he can stabilize the country. However, he is essentially a hostage to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, which operates as a state within a state. The IRGC commanders, led by Mohsen Rezaei, are currently running a parallel wartime council that often bypasses the interim civilian government. The IRGC believes that any concession on the nuclear program is an admission of defeat that will lead to the eventual collapse of the Islamic Republic. They argue that the US and Israel will never be satisfied, and that the only way to ensure survival is to maintain the nuclear deterrent, even if it remains undeclared. This internal tension is why the negotiations in Islamabad were so difficult. The Iranian negotiators often had to pause the talks for hours to check back with the various power centers in Tehran, only to return with even more rigid demands. China has also emerged as a massive player in this drama, abandoning its traditional role of quiet diplomacy. Beijing is Iran's largest oil customer and has a massive strategic interest in keeping the Strait of Hormuz open. In the last week, Chinese officials have been providing diplomatic cover for Tehran, arguing that the U.S. blockade is a violation of international maritime law. Behind the scenes, however, China is also pressuring Iran to take the deal, as the high cost of oil is threatening China's own slowing economy. The Chinese leadership has reportedly offered Iran a massive long-term investment package in exchange for a nuclear compromise, effectively acting as a guarantor for the deal's economic benefits. This Chinese involvement complicates things for Washington, as it gives Tehran an alternative to the Western financial system. If Iran believes it can survive under China's umbrella, it may be less willing to accept the harsh terms of the U.S. 15-point plan. This has led to intense diplomatic friction between Washington and Beijing, with the U.S. warning China not to undermine the sanctions regime. On the military front, the mobilization in the region is at its peak. The U.S. has deployed B-2 Spirit bombers to the island of Diego Garcia, a move that is only made when major airstrikes are being planned. These aircraft are the only ones capable of carrying the 30,000-pound massive ordnance penetrator, the only bomb in the U.S. arsenal that can reach the lowest levels of the Fordow facility. The presence of these bombers is a loud, clear signal to the Iranian hardliners. Either you deal, or we destroy your most prized strategic asset. The Iranian response has been to move their mobile missile launchers into the Zagros mountains. Intelligence satellite imagery shows hundreds of launchers for the Shahab-3 and Sejil missiles being dispersed into camouflaged positions. These missiles have the range to hit any U.S. base in the region, as well as every major city in Israel and the Gulf states. Iran has also mobilized its proxy forces, particularly Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Houthis in Yemen, signaling that a failure of the ceasefire will lead to a multi-front war that would stretch U.S. resources to the limit. The blockade itself is becoming a humanitarian crisis. While the U.S. military claims it is allowing food and medicine through, the reality on the ground is different. Shipping insurance companies have refused to cover any vessels entering Iranian waters, meaning that even authorized aid shipments are being turned back. In cities like Tehran and Shiraz, the price of basic staples like flour and rice has tripled. This is the leverage the US is using, but it is also fueling a surge of nationalism in Iran, as even those who dislike the government are beginning to resent the foreign pressure. The Pakistani delegation that visited Tehran on April 15th and 16 brought a new proposal that might bridge the gap. It involves a temporary storage facility for Iran's enriched uranium in Pakistan under joint IAEA and Pakistani supervision. This would allow Iran to technically keep its material while ensuring it is not on Iranian soil and cannot be used for a weapon. The U.S. has not yet officially responded to this proposal, but J.D. Vance hinted in a recent briefing that any arrangement that removes the material from Iran's direct control is worth considering. Turkey is also positioning itself as a key mediator. President Erdogan has a long-standing relationship with both the Iranian leadership and the Trump administration. Turkey has offered to host the next round of talks in Antalya, arguing that a change of venue might break the deadlock. Erdogan is particularly concerned about a potential refugee crisis if a full-scale war breaks out, as millions of Iranians could flee across the border into Turkey. This concern is shared by the European Union, which has been largely sidelined in these negotiations, but is terrified of the regional fallout. The timeline is the biggest enemy of peace right now. With only 6 days left, there is no time for the usual diplomatic niceties. If a second round of talks is to happen, it must begin within the next 48 hours. The logistical challenge of getting the high-level delegations back to the table is immense, especially given the security concerns in the region. There are reports that a secret location in Oman is being prepared as a backup venue, away from the media circus that surrounded the Islamabad talks. The U.S. intelligence community is also monitoring the Iranian Assembly of Experts, the body responsible for choosing a new supreme leader. There are reports that the assembly is under immense pressure from the IRGC to appoint a hardliner who will permanently end any talk of nuclear concessions. If a new leader is appointed before April 22nd, it could either consolidate power for a deal or shut the door on diplomacy forever. The uncertainty surrounding the succession is the most dangerous variable in this entire equation. In the United States, the political pressure on the White House is mounting. If the president fails to reach a deal and the war resumes, it could have disastrous consequences for his domestic agenda. Conversely, if he signs a deal that is seen as weak, his political rivals will accuse him of surrender. This puts the administration in a position where they must achieve a perfect diplomatic victory, something that is incredibly rare in the history of U.S.-Iran relations. The president's assertion that a deal is very possible may be an attempt to manage expectations or to project a sense of control over a situation that is rapidly spinning out of hand. The economic impact of a potential failure is being felt in every sector. Goldman Sachs issued an internal warning to its clients yesterday, stating that a full closure of the Strait of Hormuz could lead to an immediate $15 per barrel jump in oil prices. JP Morgan went even further, suggesting that a prolonged conflict would push global inflation back toward double digits, forcing central banks to raise interest rates even higher. This would trigger a global recession that could wipe out trillions of dollars in market value. For the global shipping industry, the Persian Gulf is already a no-go zone. The cost of insuring a cargo ship passing through the region has increased by over 500% since February. Many shipping companies are now opting for the long route around the Cape of Good Hope, which adds weeks to delivery times and adds millions of dollars in fuel costs. This disruption is causing delays in the delivery of everything from electronics to industrial chemicals, further straining a global supply chain that is still recovering from the shocks of the early 2020s. The military readiness of America's regional allies is another critical factor. Israel has been in a state of high alert since the February strike, with its Iron Dome and Arrow missile defense systems working around the clock to intercept drones and rockets fired by Iranian proxies. The Israeli government has made it clear that it will not wait for the U.S. if it believes Iran is moving toward a nuclear breakout. This creates a two-clock problem for Washington. They have to satisfy both the Iranian leadership and the Israeli government, two entities with diametrically opposed interests. The technical details of the uranium enrichment process are where the negotiations often get bogged down. The U.S. demands that Iran not only stop enrichment, but also destroy the centrifuges themselves. These centrifuges, especially the advanced IR-6 and IR-9 models, are the result of decades of Iranian research and development. To the Iranians, destroying them is equivalent to destroying their national scientific heritage. They have offered to place them under seal, but the U.S. argues that seals can be broken and that only total destruction ensures long-term security. There is also the issue of the regional militant groups, often referred to as the axis of resistance. The U.S. demand for an end to Iranian funding for groups like Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis is a major pillar of the 15-point plan. Iran views these groups as its forward defense, a way to keep its enemies occupied far from its own borders. For Tehran, cutting off these groups would mean surrendering its primary means of projecting power in the Middle East. It is a demand that strikes at the heart of Iran's regional strategy. As we look at the internal Iranian power struggle again, it is clear that the IRGC's control over the economy is a major obstacle. The Guards control vast swaths of Iran's industry, including the energy, construction, and telecommunications sectors. Any deal that involves a significant opening of the Iranian economy to foreign competition would threaten the Guards' financial interests. This means that for a deal to be successful, it must not only satisfy the political leaders, but also provide some form of economic protection for the IRGC's business empire. The human cost of this tension is often lost in the geopolitical analysis. In the streets of Tehran, people are lining up for hours for subsidized bread. In the hospitals, doctors are struggling to perform surgeries because of a lack of imported anesthetics. This is the reality of the maximum pressure campaign. While it has brought Iran to the table, it has also created a level of suffering that could lead to unpredictable social consequences. If the government falls not to a foreign bomb but to internal unrest, the resulting chaos could be even more dangerous for the region. The geographical reality of the Strait of Hormuz remains the ultimate trump card for Iran. At its narrowest point, the shipping lanes are only 2 miles wide. A few well-placed mines or a handful of sunken ships could block the channel for weeks. The U.S. Navy has extensive mine-clearing capabilities, but doing so under fire from Iranian shore batteries would be a logistical nightmare. This is why the Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgan warnings are so dire. The world simply cannot function without the oil that flows through that tiny strip of water. The Pakistani high-level delegation that traveled to Tehran on April 15 and 16 was reportedly met with a mix of defiance and desperation. The Iranian officials were grateful for the mediation, but warned that their patience was wearing thin. They pointed to the continued U.S. naval presence and the blockade as evidence that Washington is not negotiating in good faith. The Pakistani Foreign Minister, Ishaq Dar, has been working tirelessly to convince the Iranians that the April 22 deadline is a real threat and that the time for tactical maneuvering is over. As we enter the climax of this story, the most impactful revelation is the sheer scale of the military preparations that have occurred in the last 48 hours. Internal documents leaked from the Pentagon suggest that the U.S. has finalized a list of over 2,000 targets inside Iran, ranging from nuclear sites and missile silos to command centers and economic infrastructure. This is not a plan for a surgical strike. It is a plan for a comprehensive air war designed to permanently eliminate Iran's ability to project power. The emotional peak of this crisis is the realization that we are closer to a major power conflict than at any time since the 1960s. The April 22 deadline is not just a date on a calendar, it is a point of no return. If the ceasefire expires without a deal, the engines of war will begin to turn, and once they start, stopping them will be incredibly difficult. the global economy is already teetering, and a full-scale war in the Persian Gulf would be the final blow that pushes it over the edge. The turning point may have been the death of Khamenei himself. While it removed a major obstacle to peace, it also removed the one figure who could hold the various factions of the Iranian government together. Without a single supreme leader, there is no one who can make a final, binding decision. Every concession made by one faction is attacked by another, creating a paralysis that makes negotiation nearly impossible. This leadership vacuum is the most dangerous aspect of the current situation. The payoff for these 17 minutes of buildup is the understanding that the very possible deal President Trump mentioned might rely on a secret arrangement regarding the Strait of Hormuz. Sources suggest that a deal might be reached where the U.S. relaxes the blockade in exchange for Iran permanently giving up its claim to control the shipping lanes. This would be a massive strategic shift, but it might be the only way to satisfy both sides' core interests and prevent a catastrophic conflict on April 22nd. The significance of the next 6 days cannot be overstated. We are not just looking at the potential end of a regional conflict. We are looking at the possible reconfiguration of the entire Middle Eastern order. If a deal is reached, it could lead to a new era of stability and the reintegration of Iran into the global community. If it fails, the consequences will be felt in every corner of the world, from the gas pumps in small-town America to the factories in southern China. This story is far from over, and when new developments break, you will want to be here. Subscribe right now. This ceasefire expires in 6 days, and when the next move happens, you need to already be here. Tell me in the comments, do you think the US and Iran will reach a deal before April 22, or are we heading toward full-scale war? Whether the outcome is a historic diplomatic breakthrough or a return to devastating conflict, the world as we know it will be different on the morning of April 23rd. The final question is whether the leaders in Washington and Tehran have the courage to choose the uncertainty of peace over the familiar path of destruction.